Hello everyone, welcome to Ideas and Insights, a show devoted to exploring novel perspectives on contemporary issues. I am Badrinath Rao, your host. Finding well-paying, decent work with sumptuous retirement benefits is daunting for many older workers, and life in retirement is just as distressing. Security in old age is a recurring nightmare for most Americans. My guest today is Professor Teresa Ghilarducci, Bernard L. and Irene Schwartz, Professor of Economics at the New School for Social Research in New York City. An eminent scholar of retirement policies, she is the author of Work, Retire, Repeat, The Uncertainty of Retirement in the New Economy, published by the University of Chicago Press this year. Her book lays bare the staggering challenges of living with dignity after a lifetime of work. Professor Ghilarducci points out that nearly half of all families in the United States have no retirement savings. Only 21% of Americans aged 62 to 70 have enough money to maintain their living standards in retirement. The remaining 79% struggle with poverty with at most $24,000 a year to retire. 50% of older adults are living alone in precarious financial circumstances. Ironically, in the world's largest economy with an annual GDP of nearly $26 trillion, older Americans are forced to accept demeaning gig work at pitiful wages to get by. Life for most senior citizens is a relentless and ruthless struggle for mere survival, offering a searing account of the lopsided policies leading to this mess. Professor Ghilarducci underscores the urgency of addressing the erosion of retirement before it degenerates into a dystopian scenario. She debunks the strategy of forcing Americans to work longer to solve retirement inequality. Professor Ghilarducci maintains that aside from being unethical and unjust, the working longer consensus does not improve a person's Social Security benefits. Instead, she advocates a Grey New Deal, a novel blueprint for improving jobs and pensions for older Americans. This agenda prescribes long overdue initiatives such as making age discrimination laws more stringent, effective job training, good pensions, more Social Security benefits, a guaranteed retirement account, and a tax credit for workers paid for by eliminating tax breaks for high-income earners. Professor Ghilarducci joins me to discuss her ideas further. It's a pleasure to have you with us today, Professor. Thanks for joining us today.
I'm very happy to see you.
Your book talks about the erosion of retirement in the United States. You have discussed at length questions of retirement, insecurity, and inequality. How big is this problem, and how did we get here?
Well, it looks like the current generation of retirees are really surviving on intermittent work, so that the retirees that have income from work are doing so much better than the retirees who had to stop work. And notice the irony in what I just said. Retirees who get money from work means that we've disappeared retirement, for that group. And that irony is what really led me to investigate what you just asked me. How did retirement disappear? How did the new retirement become work? And how much does a working class person or even a middle class person really count on a break, catching a break at the end of a lifetime of work? And so I found that the precarity or the insecurity of retirement has just been growing for people born after 1950, and beyond. So the current retirees, especially if they're the late boomers, they're between like 60 and 72 now, they're probably going to be much better off than the middle boomers and the early boomers who just turned 65. And let's not talk about their children and their grandchildren. How did we get there? A combination of factors, but it started in 1980 when the United States started to cut Social Security benefits for future retirees. And those future retirees who got their benefits cut in the 1980s are now the current near retirees of the retirees. So raising the retirement age and not putting more money into Social Security about 10 years ago really is causing insecurity. And then 40 years ago, we started this experiment with do-it-yourself voluntary savings. No other country leapt into that kind of experiment like we did. And that experiment failed. So a failed system of voluntary retirement savings and cutbacks in Social Security are a pretty good summary of how we got here.
We will get into all the issues that you mentioned just now, one by one. But before that, as you mentioned in great detail in your book, the entire discourse on Social Security, retirement, and pension policies is riddled with myths and misinformation. You've talked about two such myths in great detail. The first one concerns the greedy geezer stereotype, and the second one is about this consensus about the benefits of working longer. You disagree with both of them. Let's take them one by one. What is this greedy geezer stereotype, and how did we come up with this?
Yeah, I have 8 myths, but this idea that somehow if old people have secure retirement, we give retirement income to geezers, which is a pejorative for older people. I sometimes call myself a geezer, but that will take it away from children. And I'm really glad you brought that myth up first. I have 8, but that one really reigns large. But even my family members ask me about that. Almost everywhere I go, good-hearted people will ask me, "Oh, but if we give money to the old, won't we be taking support away from poor children?" So I investigated this for over 20 years. Whether or not our government, the United States government, actually budgets that way, that they have $2 and they're either going to give $2 to the old or, $1 to the old or $2 to children, as if there's a fixed pie and they divide it up between those two vulnerable populations. That's not the way we do it in the United States, and that's not the way other countries do it. It seems that political coalitions that support benefits to the old are political coalitions that advocate for public spending on children's health, on children's welfare, and on children's education. So over 68 countries I examined, and I examined whether there's a trade-off between spending for the poor and spending for the rich. I found no such inverse correlation. In fact, I found a positive correlation. If you care about old ladies, it turns out you spend a lot of money on your children as a nation. So that myth is easy to dispel. It only took 20 years of research. And the second myth was
About
working.
the consensus concerning working longer.
Yeah. That other myth is that we really don't need to retire, that everyone is living longer, everyone is healthier, and the labor market has changed so much that older people can stay in the labor force in a productive way and in a healthy way. And I really did spend a lot of time on those premises. One of them is just the idea that everyone is living longer. False, false, false. It's a myth. In fact, the longevity and the healthy longevity among people in the United States, and it turns out that other countries are getting the American longevity disease, the longevity inequality disease, the difference between people by their class, their income, their education, their living situations, their race, their ethnicity has actually gotten wider. We were making great gains up until about the 80s. COVID made it worse, but so did concentrations of segregated neighborhoods, and the speed up and intensity of jobs made it worse, the inequality. So some people do not live a healthy human lifespan. We know that there are some 100-year-old yoga teachers. They're educated, they're usually white, they're usually women, but a lot of other people are doing heavy physical labor, heavy mental labor, or required to in their 50s. And we also know that people don't just work longer because they want to. In fact, we see a lot of being pushed out of work in their 50s. So that's another myth, that somehow because we're living longer, we have a workability life that's much longer. We don't. And to the extent that we do, it's very unequally distributed. With the lucky duckies, I call them, the privileged among us,
I
who
shall
can't
pursue
labor.
this question at greater length momentarily, but let me seek a clarification, Professor Ghilarducci. While discussing retirement policies, you say that the shift from defined benefits plans to defined contribution plans in the 1980s significantly increased precarity among older workers and led to the erosion of retirement.
Yeah.
For the benefit of our viewers, Professor Ghilarducci, what is this shift that you're talking about? And could you tell us a little bit about defined benefit plans and defined contribution plans?
So defined benefit plans have been disappearing. Only 11% of workers now can count on a defined benefit plan when they retire. And most of them are public sector employees. They work for state and local governments and work for school districts. What they are is a benefit that depends upon your years of service and your salary. And when you retire, it pays a benefit, usually a modest amount of income, but it pays for it for the rest of your life. You cannot withdraw from your defined benefit plan. You can't leverage it to go buy a house or remodel your kitchen or send your kid to school or do all the other things that people do with their 401k plans or their other savings plan. It's there in a professionally managed account that you can't touch until you retire. In contrast, a defined contribution plan is what half of the working population have, which is a workplace plan where the employer may or may not put a little bit of money in. You put money in, it's an individual account, you determine where it's invested, and usually you can take it out before you retire. There's some rules and penalties, but most people dip into their 401k at some point, and that means there's far less in that account by the time that you retire. So a defined benefit plan is a safer way to save for retirement, but it gives an extra benefit, Badri, and that is it pays your benefit for life. So when you're a 70-year-old, then you have a lump of money that you have to manage for the rest of your life, or you have a promised benefit for the rest of your life. The person with a promised benefit can sleep at night. A person with a defined benefit plan, their job is just to wake up in the morning. I was interviewing somebody who said that he goes golfing with his golfing buddies. He has a defined benefit plan, but his golfing buddies have to manage a lump sum. They chat and chat and chat about what's happening to the stock market, how long they're going to live. They joke about dying early. And he tells them, my retirement plan is to wake up every morning because he knows he'll have it until he doesn't.
Let's now turn to the issues you raise in part 2 of your book. You, in part 2, talk about the fallacies of working longer, and you provide incontrovertible evidence to argue that working longer makes no sense. In fact, you offer 3 exciting arguments against this consensus on working longer. You say it creates unequal retirement time, it does not promote retirement security, contrary to what most people think, and it hurts older workers, and when older workers suffer, all workers suffer. In other words, Professor Ghilarducci, your arguments subvert received wisdom.
Yeah.
Now, many are likely to say this goes against common sense. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, so in my book, thanks for bringing that up, I talk about the Harvard Health Letter. And it is such a peppy, happy letter to its readers to say, look at all the benefits of working. You're engaged, you're doing meaningful work, you have friends at work, your sociability, you protect yourself against isolation. Your employer gives you meaning and structure in your life. Well, that audience is a very particular audience. I found a lot of research. I did a meta-analysis of the research out there that for an educated group of healthy people or unusual people, they find joy in working for somebody else. But for the vast majority of people, having time to yourself, to organize your time, find your own friends, create your own meaning is a much preferred journey. All that you need is money. So there's no convincing evidence at all that working longer adds to happiness and well-being. It turns out some happy people do work longer, but it's not the work that does it. It's that human being's other innate characteristics. So there's no evidence that work makes you healthier or happier. And for some people, it kills. For women who are in service work, in that kind of mind-crushing, repetitive work, working past 65 can often actually hasten depression and hasten morbidity. For some people, working longer hurts. It also creates working longer creates a lot of inequality of retirement time, because you know why working longer actually makes retirement more affordable? It's because you have less of it. Like, I can have a very affordable lunch on Friday by skipping it. And that's what the working longer consensus says is, hey, you can have an affordable retirement, just don't retire. So I found Black men in my database really retiring for only about 12 or 11 years if they had a lower educational attainment. And a good percentage of them died before ever retiring, where white women with college education had about 19 years. And that's because they lived longer and actually were able to retire a little bit earlier. But not retiring, that third point, having people just stay in the labor market, does a couple of things that could hurt younger workers. One of them is in some professions where that's not growing, like tenured professorship. I just happen to be sitting here in my big tenured office. I'm tenured and my office is mine. That I may be blocking the assistant professorships, professors who want my job. Some of my own students, I've educated them, they have PhDs and they're out in the wild. If we all retired, around 65 or 70, there would definitely be more jobs for them. I'm not saying that if old people get out of the way, that young people will have their jobs. That would be a lump of labor fallacy, that there's only a certain number of jobs, because old people can really help complement the work of younger people. But in some professions, it does block the way. But also, more people in the labor market with nothing else happening does cause wages to fall, not the number of jobs, but the wages offered, because the employer actually doesn't have to look very far or try very hard to attract a younger worker, because they have older workers who are ready to bid down the pay. So making people work longer or dying in their boots, or just taking a 5 or 6 year retirement can hurt the opportunities and advancement of younger workers.
Let us now turn to the third and final part of your book, Professor Ghilarducci. You, having described the failed retirement policies and their ruinous consequences for our society, in the third and final part of your book, offer a new blueprint for fixing this problem, and you call it the Gray New Deal. What is the Gray New Deal and how does it work?
Well, it's a new deal, meaning that we're rethinking our retirement system. So it really changes the system of retirement income support and our value system about retirement. It says, hey, after a working life, a long working life, everyone is entitled, deserves to have a time in their life when they're still healthy to reset themselves and to create a personal narrative. You need time for that. So it's a value statement, a new deal. It's a way of thinking about thriving in an aging society. It's also new because it overturns this do-it-yourself saving system that we were supposed to depend upon. And it's gray. It's not platinum or silver or some other euphemism for gray. It's gray. It means the human condition is that we all grow old and most of us get gray hair. And so it is a statement about what we can do for policies to make that third age, that third period of our life, to be one of being thriving, of personal meaning. And so what I have said is what every American, economist would say. If an adult wants to work, we should have an economy that makes sure there's a job for them. So I'm not saying mandatory retirement, even though there's a sweet side of mandatory retirement laws. Most Europeans still have them. But we should enforce age discrimination, lift up the crystallized knowledge that older workers have and their increasing reliability, and protect them from job conditions that they can't do and accommodate their age, like we accommodate those who are disabled. So I have a whole list of ways to train older workers, to keep them in the labor market when they want to. But it's under the reality, all that research I did before that chapter, that most people are forced out in their 50s or 60s. Most people retire before they planned. So the reality is choice is great, choice is good, choice is powerful, but that most people don't have employers that want to keep them going. So I have a whole work plan that lifts up older worker status. But the second plan is to make sure that when you are pushed out or you leave the labor market, you have a decent amount of money to not make yourself rich or to go travel around the world, but at least to maintain your living standards, or if you were working poor, to lift you out of poverty. And we don't have systems that do that now.
Let me end this interview, Professor Ghilarducci. We are almost completely out of time, with one quick question, and I would appreciate your brief response. You know that there is a great deal of talk about how new technologies, advances in machine learning, AI, and so on, will change the landscape of work, with fewer and fewer people finding work, more jobs disappearing, and so on. I get the impression that advancing technologies might make retirement policies, retirement insecurity, more severe and difficult to negotiate. What suggestions do you have for workers to negotiate these challenges? Briefly.
Badri, you're right. Technology could help workers, but when it's implemented by employers, it's usually to help employers to maximize their wages. So technology is usually used to speed up work or intensify work or figure out ways to pay people less. Well, workers have to organize. They have to be as collective and as powerful as employers are. And so technology is good for us, but workers have to protect themselves against it, either with laws or with unions or with other kinds of collective action.
So the bottom line is workers have to join hands, they have to organize and assert their rights. On that empowering thought, thank you so much, Professor Ghilarducci, for joining us today. I appreciate your time and your insights. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you as well.
That's it for today. Join us next week for a new episode of Ideas and Insights. We would love to hear from you about this episode. You can email us at ideasandinsights@wgte.org. Remember, you can access Ideas and Insights anytime by visiting our website, wgte.org/ideas and insights. Thanks for joining us today. We will see you next week. Until then, goodbye.